Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good afternoon. My name is Maureen, and I am a very grateful alcoholic. And I'm shaking like a leaf. Comedian last night said there's about 1,000 people, and he said, but that's all right, there'll only be 700. I said, oh? He said, yeah, first meeting. I said, oh, wonderful, 700. So I went upstairs and shook for a while and finally fell asleep. I am definitely an alcoholic. There is no doubt in my mind or anybody else's that has ever known me that I am not. I am the child of, I believe, 2 alcoholics. My mother and father were, they had this disease, but they didn't know it. And I'm Irish. My maiden name's O'Hare, so you know where we come from. And we drank all the time, you know? I mean, we drank for christenings and birthdays and confirmations and communions and funerals. We also had a good time at a funeral, and for quite a while afterwards. We just thought that drinking was a normal thing. And I started drinking at the ripe old age of, I think I was about 6. And at night, before I'd go to bed, my father would take out the little shot glass and he'd fill it with muscatel. Daddy drank muscatel, Mommy drank sherry. I had a sweet tooth and I was Daddy's girl, and I went right for the muskie. And I'd get my little shot glass before I'd go to bed. And I thought that was great. You know how kids rush home from school to have cookies and milk? I couldn't wait till it was bedtime so I could have my muscatel. And I just thought it was wonderful. And you should always have a goal in your life, you know? And my goal was to grow up and get a bigger glass. And we drank out of, I guess they're little fruit glasses, you know? And I made it and passed it right on. I drank all through grammar school, and I drank through high school. And when I was in grammar school, I had an aunt that was very, very sick, Auntie Ann. And she lived in an apartment with her husband, but the shades were always down, and it was always, you know, kind of quiet. And she spoiled me rotten, so I just adored her. But she was sick a lot, and I remember one instance where they picked her up and rushed her down to a car and then rushed her off to the hospital. And Auntie Ann died at the ripe old age of 37. And I didn't know, you know, what had happened, and I found out years later she had this disease. And I found out that she went to AA, this new organization that was coming out, and they met in churches and they talked about their disease. And she just wasn't ready. And then when I was in the 8th grade, my father was very sick, and he went down to the doctors. And I remember as we went in, he took out a pint of muscatel, and he gave it to my mother, and he said, Ma, I just promised God that if I don't have cancer, I'll never drink again. She said, all right, Jack. And she took the bottle. And we went inside to the doctors, and he examined him, and he said, Jack, you can't drink ever again. He said, you have cirrhosis of the liver. And we had never heard of this, you know. Okay. And he gave him these stinky little bottles that smelled terrible that he had to have in his orange juice, and he drank them every day. And he didn't drink for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And then he got nervous. You know, I have to tell you, the O'Hares are a very nervous group. They really are. And they only know one way to calm down. Most of them get so calm they can't move. So he started getting nerves again, and he said, I'll just have 1 glass of wine before I go to bed, and that'll help me to sleep. Now, you know and I know that if 1 glass helps you to sleep, 2 glasses will help you to sleep a lot better. and he was off and running. And he died at the age of 54 from this glorious disease. And then I was to watch my Aunt Margie. And, oh, if there's anybody here that only drank beer, I've had them come up and say to me, I can't be an alcoholic because I only drank beer. Have I got a flash for you? Aunt Margie only drank beer, but she drank it morning, noon, and night. And she too had this cirrhosis of the liver stuff. And eventually she was dying, and she was filling up with fluid, and she had to be tapped more times than I can tell you. And in one instance, she was drowning in a fluid, and I had to help the doctor tap her. I don't know if you've ever seen it or if you've ever had it, but it's horrible. And I helped him take everything out of her and all. And that night when I went home, I think I was a junior in high school. And when I went home, I made sure that I had extra to drink. And I did what we do best. I rationalized, you know how we say, that means you lied a lot. And that's what I did. I said, well, you know, I'm not like Aunt Margie. I don't drink beer, you know. And I don't drink in the morning. I only drink at night before bed. And I thought that made me feel better, and so I had a few more drinks, and I was crocked before I hit the sheets. Aunt Margie had a horrible death. And then after she died, a little while longer, and I was to watch my mother follow the same pattern. And before she was operated on, she had, let me see now, right clavicle portal shunt. And she used to go into comas because they reversed the liver somehow. And she didn't tolerate protein, and she'd go into these comas. And before she died, she had 31 comas and 7 strokes. And I watched her, and I took care of her, and I made sure she got to the hospital, and I was drinking the whole time. The whole time. And I'd go into the hospital, and I'd tell them what to do, because you know those new residents and interns, they don't know too much. And I'd say, make sure you put, potassium in her IV, you know, and check the blood for ammonia level and all this stuff. And they'd look at me like, yeah, sure. And I was probably reeking of alcohol if it was in the morning, you know, from the night before. And if it was at night, well, God help you. And I watched all this, and I proved one thing. You cannot scare an alcoholic. You just can't scare us. You can have it for a parent, you can have it for a child, you can marry it, you can have it for a sibling, you can work with it or anything, but you can't scare an alkie. I'm different, you know, and I can handle it. And even when you fall flat on your face, you're still handling it. And everybody else that has a problem, I don't know about you, but I used to pick them out. You know, I'd say, oh yeah, he's definitely, you know, I can recognize him right away, but not me. When I came out of grammar school and into high school, and I drank through high school, and when I graduated high school, I was drinking a half a quart of rye a night. Now that's very normal for every 18-year-old girl. Half a quart of rye at night. And I'd be crocked out of my ears, and then I'd get up and go on my merry way. I got a job in Manhattan. I got a lot of jobs in Manhattan, as a matter of fact. And I was a secretary, and I kept changing jobs, you know. And I mean, I'd last a while. I'd go for 3 or 4 years, and then something would happen, like, you know, the sun would get in my eyes the way my desk was positioned, or you know, my suit would clash with the girl next to me, or I didn't like the rug, or something important. And I always got a better job. I always got, you know, a better office and a better job, and wasn't I smart to keep moving onward and upward? And the truth was, I left just before the axe would fall. I was going out with a fella from Staten Island, and Larry, and we'd go out at night, we'd go to work in the morning, and we'd work all day, and then we'd come home and have dinner, and then he'd come around and pick me up, and we'd take a ride, and we'd go out to Jersey and walk the boardwalk or something like that, and we'd come on back into Staten Island to drink, and we'd go to the Vanity Fair on Highland Boulevard, and the bartender out there made the most delightful Rob Roy you've ever seen. And, You know what Rob Roys are, don't you? 2, you don't know your mother, and 3, you don't care. And I went through life uncaring, and he would make these Rob Roys, and I would have 15 or 20, because I had to get up and go to work. You know, I couldn't have too many. And then on the weekends, I could cut loose and have more. And then we'd get up and we'd walk out to the car, and I thought this made me a lady. You know, I got up and I walked out. It didn't make me a lady, it made me lucky. Because when you're built like me, there ain't nobody gonna carry you. And we'd go out to the car and we'd get in and we'd stop and buy some rolls, and then we'd, you know, go our merry way. And I'd sleep for about 3 or 4 hours and get up, and in a coma I'd go to work, and I'd meet him on the bus stop. And you know, I don't know these people that get up here and say I never had a hangover. Don't worry, I had them for you. I would get on that bus stop and my head would be the size of Chicago. And I'd go off to work, and I'd take dictation, and I always swore that I had a little tape recorder in the back of my head, because I'd play it back somehow and type it out. And then at lunch I'd go out and have a little bit of lunch, and then come back, and by 3 o'clock I was feeling pretty good. And by 5 o'clock I was ready to go out and do it all over again. And I didn't have a problem. My mother, though, was getting sicker and sicker, and eventually she had to be operated on. And at that time, just a little before, Larry and I had split up. And they sent her after the operation up to Connecticut, and she was in a convalescent hospital. And after leaving Larry on Staten Island, I get very confused after a while. After leaving Larry on Staten Island, I met Gary up in Connecticut. And that's not the worst. When I came back to Staten Island, my cousin fixed me up with Harry. And now I'm married to a man named Larry again. I don't know if I'm poetic or redundant. But, you know, I thought it was swell up in Connecticut, and Gary was from Arkansas, and he said, we drink Coke and bourbon down south. And I said, okay. You know, I have nothing against the South, so I drank Coke and bourbon. And I put a quart of bourbon in my trunk in the car, and I put a quart of bourbon up in my room. And, you know, you never know when you're going to have a snowstorm, even in the August or something. And then we left, and we came back down, and we were on Staten Island. Now, I want you to know, I went to Weight Watchers, and I lost 55 pounds, which you can plainly see I found again. I don't actually lose weight. I just sort of put it aside for a while and then pick it up again in a little while. And I descended on the world. Before that, when Larry and I were going out, I was only a cocktail lounge drinker. And I thought, you know, I'm a lady. I wore white gloves. And my hat and bag and shoes and gloves all matched. And just cocktail lounges. And now I descended on the world. The gloves were off, and I descended as a bar hopper. And I found it was just as much fun in a bar as it was in a cocktail lounge. But you don't order Rob Roy's in a cocktail lounge, in a bar rather. You know, they look at you really weird. So I said to him, I said, I'll have 7 and 7, and not too much 7-Up because it gives me gas. You gotta watch out for that gas, it'll kill you. So I was off and running, and I had 2 or 3 girlfriends, and they loved to bar hop. And I had a car, and that was great. And we'd go out, and we'd drink all night, and we'd dance, and we'd sing, and I thought I was so adorable. And then I'd make sure I got them all home. You know, I'd drive each one home and watch them in the house. And when the last one got out and went in the house, I went into a total blackout. And I don't remember a thing after that. But somehow, there has to be a God. Somehow I got home, and I put the car in the garage, and I went upstairs, and you know, when I was a little girl drinking the shot glass of wine, my mother must have been upset. And my father said, Ma, it's all right, it won't hurt her, it's good for her, it'll help her to sleep. So I hooked on to that immediately, and for 30 years, I believed that if I didn't have a drink before I went to bed, that I couldn't sleep. And then when I got sober, I found out that I can fall asleep crossing the street against the light. So I went home and I'd go in the house and I'd make myself a little dinky. And I'd walk into a few walls and say, excuse me, demented. And then I'd go to bed. I remember one time I slept on the kitchen floor, and the next day I said to my mother, how come I slept on the floor last night? And she said, don't you remember? I said, no, I wouldn't be asking you. She said, you had to have that drink when you came home. And then you said, I'm tired. So you laid down and went to sleep. I said, oh, okay. And I went my merry way. So eventually I met my husband in a cocktail lounge. We were back on the cocktail lounge plan. And my cousin Neely and I had gone out bouncing, and we stopped in the cocktail lounge, and he was there. And we started going out, and he didn't know what fun he was in for. And we went out for about 1.5 years before we were married. And in the first year, Larry only saw me ossified once. And I want to tell you, I didn't get drunk. You know, Mommy said girls, ladies don't get drunk. So I got loaded, I got high, I got smashed, I got ossified, I got a lot of stuff, but I never got drunk. So this night, my girlfriend had a party, and Larry was working late, and we went up to the party. It was a costume party, and she had 3 big pitchers, and one was full of Manhattans, and one was full of martinis, and the third one was full of Rob Roy's. And every time you took a drink out of it, you know, and your glass went down, they'd come running over and they'd fill it up again. So you only had 1 drink all night, you know? You could be smashed out of your mind, but you only had 1 drink. And eventually Larry came, and I was not feeling any pain, and he tried very hard to catch up soon. And there was a young girl there that he knew from his younger years, and I hate to tell you this, but she got drunk. She really got drunk. And she went in the bedroom and lay down and passed out. And he said to me, what do you say we take her home and make sure she gets in and all? And I said, okay. So we poured her into the car, and we got in and we drove home. And all the way home, I'm looking in the back seat, and terrible young girl like that. So Larry got her out of the car, and he brought her in the house, and he came back and he got in the car, and that's the last thing I remember. And then the next night, Larry used to come after work, and he came down to my house, and he rang the bell, and I opened the door. I said, hello, how are you? Come on in, have a dinky. And he came in. Now, for those of you that know him, Larry's a very solemn man. He takes the weight of the world upon his shoulders. And he had the most serious face you've ever seen on him. And I fixed him a drink, and I said, here you go, you know. And I said, what's the matter? What are you so serious about? He said, you'll have to tell me sober what you told me last night when you were drinking. So I agreed to tell him what I had told him on one condition, and that was that he'd tell me what I told him. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. So he told me, and I lied my way through it, and that should have frightened him, but it didn't. And that should have frightened me when he wasn't scared, but it didn't, and we went our merry way. And then on June 1969, we were married. And now I was Sadie, the married lady, and I worked for about I worked more than that. We were married in June, and I think it was around October or September or something. The boss looked at me wrong, and I taught him a lesson. I went out to lunch, and I never came back, which is why he's still in business. And, you know, he called me a few times, and I said, no, I'm not coming back. And I told Larry how, you know, he'd be sorry. He lost the best secretary he ever had, and he was going to be damn sorry. We were newlyweds. He loved me. He bought it, and I was home free. And now I was about to become the world's greatest drunk, but I didn't know that then. And what I would do is, again, you don't drink in the morning, so I would stay up all night and drink even after he went to bed. And then I'd go to bed about an hour before he did, after he did, about an hour before he got up. I'd go about 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'd slip into a coma. And then he'd get up and he'd go out inside and he'd shave and shower and all. I never got him in bad habits like breakfast and stuff like that. Never. And he'd get ready and he'd say, I'm going to work now, and I'd go to the door with him. I was a good wife, and I'd say, goodbye, dear, have a good day, and I'd kiss him goodbye, and he'd go his merry way, and I'd slip back into a coma. And I'd get up about 12 or 1, and I'd have a cup of tea, because I'm a lady, and I'd drink my tea and I'd put it in the sink, because housework didn't thrill me any more than office work did. Work is a 4-letter word. And I'd call my mother up and I'd say, get ready, I'm coming up to pick you up, and we're going to go to Aunt Kathy's, or we're going to go shopping, or here and there. She'd say, oh, all right. So I'd go and pick her up, and we'd go off all day long, and then we'd come back. And it would be about 4 or 5 o'clock, and I'd bring her up to my apartment. And now 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you can drink, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody drinks at 4 or 5. I was amazed when I got sober to find out there are people out there that really don't drink. I was utterly amazed. I didn't know that. So it's 4 or 5, and I make myself a little dinky. And then I put the meat on, and then I go in and set my new dining room table. And I come back out and make another dinky. And then I peel the potatoes and I fix the vegetables and I do a few other things and I make another dinky. And then I go in and, make sure everything was okay in the dining room and this and that, and I'd make another dinky, and by the time Larry come home, I was donkey. And, and I found out something. I found out that if I made the drinks for Larry, he forgot a lot. I didn't know about blackouts. I didn't know anything about them. I thought I had a bad memory. So I'd make him a few of my bombs. Now, most people make a drink with a glass of ginger ale and a shot of booze. But I reversed it. I made it with a shot, a glass of booze and a little shot of ginger ale, because that ginger ale gives you gas. And after about 3 or 4 of them, he was wiped out. He didn't know who did what. And then in the morning, if he hollered at me, I'd say, don't you yell at me. I wasn't drinking it alone, You were sitting right there having them too. And he'd say, oh, okay. He couldn't argue because he didn't remember. And he'd go his merry way. Now, my mother was getting sicker and sicker, and her daughter was too, but I didn't know it. We moved to our second apartment, and here's where I really had some fun. When I woke up in the morning, I didn't wake up till 12 or 1 in the afternoon. So that takes care of morning drinking right there. And I go out, I have a little glass on the nightstand, whatever I left, which wasn't much, and I'd pick out the fruit flies and drink it. And I'd go out to the kitchen and I'd call the liquor store. Now, we weren't on a first name basis, we were on voice recognition. And as soon as he heard my happy voice, he'd say, hi, how are you? And I'd say, I'm fine, how are you? And how quick can you get that kid down here? And I'd order 2 bottles of gin, because that's what I was drinking. 2 bottles of gin a day. And I didn't have a problem. And the kid would come. I always tried to save like that much in the bottom of the bottle. And then in the morning, I'd have a drink and throw it up, and have a drink and throw it up, and keep going till it stayed down. And by then the kid was knocking at the door, and I opened the door, I had the money ready, and I was ready for the day. And I didn't have a problem. My mother was getting sicker and sicker. Eventually, the day came that I thought I was prepared for. She died, and I got the call from the hospital. And I called Larry at work, and we went over, And I don't remember too much, because I had been so drunk the night before that I was just still in a fog. And I went through the facade of a wake and a funeral. Now, I had started carrying a bottle in my purse. And the purse I have with me today is very small. The purse I used to carry was about this wide and about that deep, and I carried a cord. I'm not dainty in any manner. And I put the cord in, and now she's dead, and we're going to the funeral home, and I can't carry that big pocketbook. So I have a clutch bag, so I got all the little nips. I don't know if they have them down here, but up in New York they do, and I had a whole bunch of them, and I put them in the pocketbook. And I'm not proud of it, but I spent a lot of my mother's funeral, and the wake rather, in the ladies' room. You know, I just had to go in there and settle down. Now, I had a little song that I sang all these years that I was drinking, and it goes something like, my father died when I was 16. My mother is so sick, she's having all these comas and strokes. And if you had my problems, you would have to drink too. And if your mother died after all that, you'd need a little drink to calm you down too. And I shook like a leaf. I used to go to the bank and I swore they put the same teller there just to aggravate me. Because she moved like mud. And I was, you know, I'd go to sign the check and my hand would be shaking, so I started signing them at home. And then she'd take a walk from the window and she'd go here and there, and I'd say, oh God, where is that girl? And she'd bring it back and I'd get the money. And I'm still shaking now at the wake and the funeral. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. It was just that my father died when I was 16. And my mother had a lot of comas and strokes. And now she's dead, and if you had my problems, you'd shake too. And I believed it. You have to believe the story you tell. That's why we're such great storytellers, you know? We have to convince ourselves first before we can sell it to anybody else. And I sold a lot of stories. My mother was buried, and was that November 2nd? 3rd. All right, and you can tell he has to tell me I'm not too well. She died November 3rd, and I woke up on December 17th. And that's the longest blackout I've had up till this date, thank God. And in that blackout, I want you to know that I walked, and I talked, and I drove a car. And I went to the doctors, they tell me, and I told him that maybe, you know, just maybe I drink a little bit too much. I didn't tell him it was 2 quarts. And he said, Maureeen, now let me explain something to you. If you're an alcoholic and you have this horrible disease, it is your responsibility to take care of it. It is your responsibility to acknowledge it. And it is your responsibility to make your doctor aware of what you have, or it may kill you. And he said, now this doctor took care of my father and my mother and my aunt that was rushed down in the car. He's the doctor that tapped my other aunt, and I helped him. And he saw all this, and he said to me, you've had a tough time. He said, and you've seen a lot of people do things that they shouldn't do. And he said, I'm going to give you a mild tranquilizer to calm you down. And I said, okay. And I always used to pat my back. I don't take pills. I only drink. And I don't make excuses, because people that make excuses have a problem. I couldn't make excuses. I didn't know what day it was. And that mild tranquilizer that he gave me was Thorazine. You've heard? 300 milligrams, and you have to take it every 8 hours. So I went home and I would take a pill, and I would go in the bathroom and tinkle, and I'd go to bed. And 8 hours later, I'd get up and take a pill, and I'd go in the bathroom and tinkle, and I'd go to bed. And so on and so forth. Get up in 8 hours, and I didn't need an alarm clock. Something woke me up. Time for your medicine. In the beginning, Larry was very happy, though. He really was, because now I was getting up to tinkle, and that was a big improvement. Somebody should have given him rubber sheets for a wedding present. Who knew? And I was just taking my pills the way I was supposed to, but somewhere along the way, somebody slipped me a bottle of gin. I know it wasn't me. And I was drinking gin and taking Thorazine. And how I'm alive, I don't know. And on December 17th, I woke up and came out in the living room, and he said, you know, The other night when you were sleeping, you were foaming at the mouth and your eyes were back and all this stuff. And he said, now again, you just had it. And he said, I'm calling the doctor. I said, oh, you get so hysterical over everything. For God's sakes, don't call the doctor, I'm fine. Well, he did call the doctor, and it's a damn good thing, too. And they called in there. Oh, I know what happened before you called. I took a fit, literally. I went backwards over the couch, and when you're built like me, honey, you don't do backflips. And I backflipped over the couch, and I guess I took a seizure. And he called the ambulance, and they came, and they got me, and off we went to the hospital, and they were going to admit me, and they weren't, and they were, and they weren't, and they called the doctor. Finally, he was reached, and he said, admit her right away. And they put me on a gurney, and they took me down to the x-ray room. Now, I remember being on that gurney, and I remember going down the hall, and I remember saying to myself, oh, it's just like on television. Look at the lights. Yeah. Oh, I talk about a loony bird. And they got me into x-ray, and they got me on the x-ray machine, and I took a grand mal seizure, and I died. They called it a code 99. And he was outside, and he was talking to his friend who was one of the guards, and he saw the doctors run in, and he saw them run out and run in, and he was outside, and he was praying for me. And inside, the doctors worked very hard, and obviously they brought me back. And he's never prayed since, so. Be very careful what you pray for. Because if you get it, you won't know what to do with it. I woke up in a bed about a day and a half later, and I was in one of the beds my mother had been in. I was being treated by the same nurses, and I didn't know it, but I was being treated for the same disease. And Dr. Morris set me up for, what do they call those things? They put the wires in your head, brain scan or something. And they did that, and then he came in the next day and he said, Maureeen, I have to tell you that you are an epileptic. Oh, I said, thank God, Dr. Morris. You know, I figured that was great, because if you have epilepsy and you take your medicine and do what he says, you get better, and then you can have a dinky. I said, thank God, Dr. Morris. I was afraid I might be an alcoholic. And I was serious. I was dead serious. Larry brought me home, and when I had that grand seizure, I almost ate my tongue. And this side of my mouth was so swollen, it wasn't even funny. It was Christmas, and we went over to my uncle's for dinner, and they were all eating turkey and gravy and all that good stuff, and I just sat there and watched, because if it just hit the side of my jaw, I was crying. I didn't drink for about 6 months, not because I had learned a lesson or anything, you understand, but because I was frightened. That miserable man kept telling me terrible stories about what I did, you know? He told me that I ate my tongue and my ears were bleeding, or something else was bleeding, and this and that. Do you know what, on television, those stories that you see, and they put a center picture and then they have fogged up the edges, and all you can see is the center? And that's an alcoholic mind. We keep sticking the cotton around until we see what we want to see. All that other stuff we wash away. And then right in the middle, we see what we want to see. And it's never as bad as it seemed when it happened. And eventually, I saw that I wasn't an alcoholic. We were buying a house in Jersey, and the bank turned us down, so I taught them a lesson. I went out and bought a bottle. And I come home, and I poured a water glass full of gin, and I slugged it down, and then I got scared. I said, oh my God, am I going to have a convulsion? And I said, now, Maureen, stay calm, because, you know, when you get excited, the electrolytes go out of balance, and that's what gives you a convulsion. So I had another glass of gin, because that keeps you calm. And I was so calm by the time he came home, I didn't know who he was. He wasn't too happy, to say the least. But we went our merry way. We bought a house in Jersey, and over we went. Now, I sang that song for so many years about my father, my mother, the whole routine, and now we're out in Jersey in our own new home, and Larry's mother moved in with us. So I got a new song to sing now. If your mother-in-law lived with you the way my mother-in-law lives with me, you drink too. And I was off and running, and it was nothing. I mean, I went right back to 2 quarts of gin. Right away, no hesitation, no thought about it. I got a job down the highway for a little while, and I was drinking. Now, you can't bring booze to work. Even I know that. So I found a marvelous thing I want to tell you about. I found it on Staten Island when I had a cold. It's called NyQuil. Great stuff. At that time, it was 25% alcohol. That makes it 50 proof. And if I didn't have NyQuil, I had Vicks 44. And that was, 20%, so I made it 40 proof. And it was better than most wines. And one day, the drugstore had a big sale on it, the NyQuil. I bought 20 bottles. And the druggist looked at me weird, and I said, well, you know, it's such a good sale, I just thought I'd keep a couple in. If you had pneumonia for a year, you wouldn't use 20 bottles of NyQuil. And I was out of it very shortly. See, back in Staten Island, before we came to Jersey, I used to do that, and you can't get any kind of booze on Sunday, so that was good for Sunday. But then out in Jersey, eventually you could buy whatever you wanted. I don't have to die to go to hell, because I've lived there. I've lived there for a very long time. I would wake up in the morning, and I would slide out of bed, and I would go across to the bathroom, and I'd have my little bit of gin from the night before, and I'd take a drink and throw it up, take a drink, the usual routine, until it stayed down. And then I put my pants on, kept my hair very short so I didn't have to comb it, and my clothes were in a neat pile on the floor, and I went over and put the same clothes on, and I never looked in a mirror because I didn't want to see me. And I went out and got in the car and went up at 9 o'clock to the liquor store. Now, I'm a late sleeper. I mean, I can sleep till 12, 1 o'clock, and I consider that getting up early. And I would be up at 9 o'clock when that liquor store opens. And I'd drive up, and I'd go in. And I used to put an act on, for the guy in the liquor store, like he cares. If you have the money, buy it. He doesn't care. Shine your shoes with it. He doesn't care. And I'd say, I get down the aisle with different things. So now I'm really cramped for money, because he's very mean. He won't give me any. So I'd have to clip $1 here and clip $1 there and save and all. And I always drank top of the line booze. And I'd go in and I'd say, oh, we're having company for dinner tonight. And I don't know what to buy. And I'd buy a half gallon of Gallo port. And then I'd pay him in nickels and dimes, and I said, oh, he gets paid the end of the week. I just want to get rid of my change. Oh, God. And there was a lady sitting up front a lot of times, and she took my money, and she never said a word, and she never moved, and she never did anything. She just put it in the bag and handed it to me. And I found out after I got in AA, she was paralyzed. She had gotten loaded before I did. And she was bombed out of a tree. That's why she didn't say anything. And I thought, I wonder if I can get a job up there. But I'd take the bottle home. Now, I'd buy one bottle, and I'd have it in my hand. And I'd get in the car, and I'd be crying. And I was crying because I didn't know where I was going to get the money for the next bottle that day. And I'd go home, and I'd sneak into my room, because his mother was living with us, And I'm sure she never knew what I was doing. And I'd open it up and I'd have a slug. And I'd keep going, and then I'd look around for money and all that jazz. And he said that eventually I was stealing from him, and I don't remember that at all. Until one day I was making the bed, and I lifted the mattress up and I found a $20 bill. And I don't believe in the tooth fairy. And I took the 20 and I ran out and bought booze. And he told me that I had snuck in and gotten his wallet and taken money before, and I don't remember it. I really don't. But I was drinking day and night. I was sliding out of bed and crawling across the floor to the bathroom when I remembered to wake up and go. I just would just about crawl back to the bed and go in, and I was just drinking and passing out, and drinking and passing out, and drinking and passing out. And I thought, I didn't think. I really didn't. I couldn't think. I just wanted to be numb. And every time he'd holler at me, I'd say, "Leave me alone." And that's just what I meant. I just wanted to be left alone and to drink. And then he went to Staten Island one Saturday with his mother. And I woke up feeling weird. The back of my head was filling with fluid or something. And I went out to the kitchen. Now, ever since I was a little kid, I take rye, I take gin, I take scotch, I take bourbon, I take wine, I take cocktails, I take highballs, all of them. But I would not drink beer. Beer is the most wretched thing in the universe. And I woke up standing in front of the refrigerator drinking a can of beer. And I looked at it and I said, what the hell am I doing drinking beer? And I answered myself and I said, you have to have alcohol in your system 24 hours a day. And I called one of the girls in AA because just before that I had gotten into AA and I had lasted a month and a half. And I had the best sponsor in the whole world. She kicked my butt from here to Chicago. And I called Mary, and they took me up to a doctor. Now, when you're built like me, honey, you don't go out without underwear, you know? You just don't do it. But that day, I just pulled on an old dirty pair of slacks, and I put a shirt on, and I just followed them wherever they wanted to take me. And I was shaking, and I was sick. And the doctor examined me, and he had a strange office. It was open a door and go in and around, and there was a regular path, and that's what I was doing. I was walking around this path. And as I went by one time, he grabbed my slacks, pulled them down, and shoved a needle in, and put them up and said, "Go ahead." And I kept walking, and it was to bring me down and calm me down. And then he took some pills, and he said to Mary, "You give them to her. Don't let her take them, because she could overdose." Now, I always have a smart mouth. You know, if I was going to commit suicide, I wouldn't come to you. And he said, "Lady, the condition you're in, you wouldn't know whether or not you took it. You know, you'd remember a half an hour later and say, gee, did I take it or didn't I?" And you take another one, and you can overdose on these. And Mary took me. Now, I didn't smell too good. I was drinking for 2 weeks. And Mary took me home and put me in her bed. And I'll never, never forget that lady. And I was a mess. And she had a nice, clean bed, nice, clean sheets. And I was upstairs in her room, and she'd come in whenever I needed a pill, and she'd give it to me. And she'd, "Do you want to eat?" And I said, "Oh, no, Mary, please." And I stayed there all day until that night. And she brought me home. And she said, "I'm going to hide the pills because I don't want you to accidentally take them. Have Larry call me when he gets home." And I said, "Okay." So she left, and I walked the floors and I guess banged my head a few times. And Larry finally came home with his mother. And I said, "Oh, Larry, thank God you're home." I said, "I almost died today." And he looked me right in the eye and he said, "It's too bad you didn't." I thought he had a hell of a nerve. I mean, there I was. I hadn't drank all day long, and that's the thanks I get. That's the sympathy he gave me. I said, "Mary wants you to call her because there's pills I have to take." And she said, "I'm not calling her." I said, "You have to call her. The doctor said I'm supposed to take these pills." So he tortured me for a while. And then he called Mary. And then he gave me the pills. And I mean, I came down at home. They didn't have all the rehabs they have now, and they didn't have detox and all that jazz. And I walked the floors, and I'd sleep on the bed, and then I'd walk out and sleep on the floor, and then I'd walk around the dining room, and I'd walk around the kitchen, and I'd go around the living room again, and I'd lay on the couch, and I'd lay on the floor, and I drank ginger ale until it was coming out of my ears. And eventually I started to calm down and stop shaking. And I went to, that week before, Larry came into the bedroom on Wednesday. And he said to me, he said, "I've had enough and I can't take anymore." He said, "I went to a lawyer and I signed papers." So I sat up in bed, crocked out of my mind. And I said, "I want the car and I want the dog, and shut the door when you leave the room. I mean, if you want lessons on how to be a bitch, just call me." And he went out, and then when he went out, I cried. I cried very hard, but I wasn't telling him. I was scared, so I had another drink, and I wasn't telling him. And now it's that weekend, and then Monday, and I got a job, I started working, I got my own lawyer to defend myself against that mean man. And it was really hell. I mean, if I thought it was bad drinking, that was bad. I went to work, he went to work, we bitterly fought. His mother lived with us, and now the curtains were up. Now everything was off, and she was letting me know what she thought. And every so often he'd start yelling at her, and she'd yell at him, and then I'd get into it, and it was terrible. It was 3 very, very sick people. Mom was a very sick lady, and that's my fault. I crucified her the whole time she lived with us. I really did. Eventually he called off the divorce, and eventually his mother went back to Staten Island. I thank God he called off the divorce. Thank God she went back to Staten Island. And we sold the house, and we bought a second house. And eventually that man that was so mean to me, that picked on me so constantly, he came into AA. So God has a good sense of humor. And what have you got now? 34 years. Stand up, Larry. So then it's not easy, I'll tell you, when you put a marriage back together. We fought like cats and dogs, but we were lucky. They had a group that, AA and Al-Anon, that, for married couples. And I guess we learned something, right? Now, I want you to know that while I was drinking, the best thing I had to tell God was that he was a very mean God. He really was. He didn't love me. And he wouldn't give me a baby. Now, I didn't change the sheets wet when I was drinking, and I'm going to change a baby. And, I'd be such a good mother. You give them to people that are mean to them, that abuse them, and I would never do that. I said to Larry, if I had a baby then, I'd probably put it down somewhere and forget it, walk home, and 3 days later say, "Wasn't there a kid around this house somewhere?" But 4 years after I got sober, I found myself delightfully pregnant at the age of 40. Yes. He told me life began at 40. I thought he meant my life. And we had a beautiful baby girl, Patricia Catherine Marion Drohan, was still Irish. And Patty is a beautiful girl, a lovely girl, and she grew up. And, I used to let her live on a year-to-year basis, because when they hit the teens, oy vey. She went down to Virginia and attended Marymount College, and she graduated with 2 degrees, I'm proud to say. And she stayed in Virginia. Now, when she was little, I used to always say, when I have a child, I'm going to bring them up to be independent and stand on their own 2 feet and all this stuff. Well, she didn't come home. I guess I did a good job. I don't know. And now she's married, and she has a beautiful little girl, Madison Lynn, and she just found out she's having a boy. So I'm thrilled. We have grandchildren. I'd have to come and stay for another 6 hours to tell you all the good things that happened. When you get sober, it's rough in the beginning, and I'm not going to diminish that. It's very rough, and especially when the 2 of you are fighting like cats and dogs. But gradually, it starts to fall into place. And I still have Barbara for a sponsor. And my advice to you, if you're new or coming back or whatever, get yourself a sponsor. Get yourself somebody that isn't afraid to say no. Somebody that isn't afraid to kick in the pants when you need it. Get yourself a tough sponsor. Because, you know, it's only recently, you know, that they're saying, it's all right, sweetheart, it'll be all right. Barbara never said that to me. You know, one day I said to her, I'm going to stay home tonight, Barbara. She said, what do you mean you're staying home? I said, well, they said at the meeting that we have to be responsible to our family and all that stuff. And I said, you know, I have a family. And she said, your husband is divorcing you. Your mother-in-law hates your guts. And the dog hides under the bed when you get up. Have your ass in front of the door at 7:30. I'm picking you up for a meeting. And I said, yes, Barbara. Because unless you were severely damaged, you didn't say no, Barbara. She took me North Jersey, South Jersey, East Jersey, West Jersey. She told me when I had to start speaking. She rode my back, and I thank God for her. I really do. She died recently, and I'm heartbroken. But I thank God for Barbara. And I told her, I said, I never would have made it without you. She said, oh, no, 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 no. The only one that get you sober is yourself. I said, well, your kick in the pants didn't hurt. And oh, please don't get somebody that's going to hold your hand or pat your back or something like that. You don't need it. We have enough sympathy in us for ourselves and everybody else in the room. And we make excuses before you ask the question. And we don't change. We really don't change, you know? I mean, I can still think of something whenever you're going to ask me a question. My mind's already thinking up the answer. And that's not how it works. And I knew I was getting better when one day I started to realize that I was still crocheting on the answer. And I said, that's not true. That's really not true. AA gave me a whole new life. It gave me back my husband and my marriage. It got me my little baby girl. I can't tell you all the good things it's done for me and all the wonderful people I've met. I wouldn't have met all of you. And all the other people I've met on conventions and on Matt Talbot retreats and in groups. And I thank God every day for it. I just don't know what else to say. But I thank all of you for being here, and I wish you all a happy and a 24 hours.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious. Do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected. even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.